So we're learning the Igeres haTeshuva, page 188. We're towards the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom, after the period. And the Alter Rebbe said over here that the 2 last letters of Hashem's name, the Vav and the Hey, the Vav represents the 6 midos, the 6 attributes, the 6 emotional attributes, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, that's a Chayid and Yesod. And the last Hey represents Malchus. Let's continue. Kipnimis u'makir hadibur. And the Alter Rebbe said that this refers to dibur, to speech. And he explains, because the inner and source of speech, hu ha'hevel ha'oila ben halev, it is the air that ascends from the heart, u'mischalek lehei moitzois hapeh, and is divided into the 5 utterances of the mouth. Aleph, Ches, Hey, Ayin, Acha, Mahagoron. Those letters come from the throat, etc. So in other words, the speech that one speaks comes from the Pnimius. What the Alter Rebbe is showing here, that the Vav and the Hey being Malchus Isser, Hey being Dibur, is motivated by the feelings, the Vav, and the feelings come from the understanding, the expansion, Bina, and the Bina's comes from the Yud, Chochmah. That's the progression here, and the continuation. And he says, V'gam havodas ha'hei, he says, when you pronounce the Hey, he b'chinas hevel levad, Hey, 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 it's only hevel, air. K'moshe Kosov, as it says, Osa klila, Hey is a letter that is weak, the les bo mamosha, that has no mamoshiyut, no tangibility. The Hey is a type of a letter that is really only but an expression of the inside. Ha, ha. the air comes out when I say the Hey. This is the rhetorical question of the Alter Rebbe. And although Hashem doesn't have, God forbid, a body, so how do we apply these concepts to Hashem? So the Alter Rebbe retorts, nevertheless, the Torah does employ human terminology. So you're right, to restrict God to these human terms and ideas is wrong, but to use them as a way of understanding Hashem and how He creates the world and the system of creation, etc., it is appropriate to use this terminology. And this line, Ach dibre Torah keloshem b'nei Adam, is a truism for many other areas of Torah, not just for Chasidism, not just for Kabbalah, but in the Chakira, most in Kabbalah and Chassidus, you'll find this idea. And even in the Gemara, at times, when we use human terminology for Hashem, this idea is expressed in Dibre Torah, Kiloshem B'nei Adam. The Torah does use human language, although not to restrict God to the human language. And of course, this would be a refutation of Spinoza's argument that God is the table and that God is the chair and all of that. That is, in the view of Torah, a heresy, because to use those terms, not just use those terms, to use the terms and to mean that God is actually a chair is heresy. To say that there's value to a chair, and how did God create the chair, and let's look at the chair and let's take lessons for God, is fine. So basically, that's the concept of a metaphor. anthropomorphically speaking, as it's brought, the words. It's a metaphor, only a metaphor. This is what the Rebbe says over here. Let's continue. Shagam Dvar Hashem Chav Beis Oisius Hamischalkus Lehei. Yes.
Before you go on, I stuck on the last idea. How do you reconcile? I'm not sure I understand exactly what the Spinoza philosophy, but how do you reconcile the idea with the sense that God is creating everything continuously?
The answer is godliness. It's the difference between godliness, which means a force and energy, versus, right? Godliness creates the world continuously. There's godliness. Godliness doesn't equal God.
So Spinoza would say that God is creating the chair as opposed to godliness. I don't.
Yeah.
What would he say?
My understanding. I'm not a Bucky in Spinoza. Maybe Isha knows better. But my understanding is that his philosophy was that God is the chair and God is the table.
My understanding of Spinoza is that essentially he was an atheist without the lashon of atheism. And so to replace the concept that there is no God, God was present in everything, nature was God. But really at the heart, he was an atheist.
Okay.
And everything existed since the beginning of time.
Okay, fine. But I understand, but I'm not addressing that part of, I understand. But you said also that he believed that what? That nature is God. Hillel, you heard? Nature is God.
Yeah, that I've heard.
And so that's the same thing. It's saying God is the chair. And Chasidis and Kabbalah say no. There is godliness in the chair. There is a force that animates the chair. You don't hear the difference between a force and energy that animates something versus this is God?
I can understand the idea of deifying something as a heretical danger. I'm saying that, this thing itself is God. And as a bechina of avodah zarah. But I don't hear a difference between the idea that godliness is creating something as opposed to that God is creating something in an ongoing way. It's just a distinction I can't hear.
Okay, so you'll spend Shabbos meditating on it.
Okay.
I'm serious. That's what Chabad meditation is, to think about the idea. Just focus, think, and you still might come with no conclusion, or not understand it, but spend some time in thinking about it. Let's go on.
Yeah, but okay.
Shagam Dvar Hashem. Although the word of Hashem, Chav Beis Oisius, through the 22 Hebrew letters, Hamischalkos Lehei, top of page Sadikei, Lehei Chelke Hamatzois, which are divided and are expressed through 5 different ways of expression. Uvehem Nivre Kol Yitzur, and it's with these 22 letters, as expressed through the 5 different methods of expression, that creates all of existence, as we learned earlier, chapter 11, explaining at length these letters. So the kocha, this is the mashal, now the nimshal, the moral. The kocha mam is so too, al derech mashal, hamavdil havdalos leikoitz, Adam finaitim, b'nishmas ha'odam, when it comes to the soul of man. Shahu p'chinas nefesh elikis, referring to the Jewish soul, the nefesh elikis. The mitoichi nofach, that God blew within man from his very inner core. Yeshba p'chinas seichel hanelam, it incorporates also a hidden intellect, hamarumes b'yais yud, that's alluded to in the yud within the person's neshama. Shebekoichoi, which has the potential, lotze selagili, to go to manifest itself, Lahavan or lahaskil, to comprehend and understand by mitose yisbarech, in the truthfulness of God, uvedulas in His greatness. Kol chad v'chad lefum sheyur delay. Every individual based on their capacity of comprehension. Lefi reichav sichle binose, based on the expansion of their mind. Ukefi asher ma'imik sichloi, that's seichel is chochma, bina here is bina, and then he adds it's also dependent upon how much hamoka, ma'imik, which is das, how much depth you put into the idea, umarchiv daita ubinosai, and you go on intellectually to expand your mind and your comprehension, and then you do what I just suggested to Hillel, you meditate bigdulosai, on God's greatness, yizbarich. So when you do all that, azai murumezes binosai biyoishei, this process of the last 3-4 lines that I just read is alluded to in the second letter of the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is Bina. Bina is this process. Sheyesh lo rechev, Bina has breadth, v'gam oirech, and also length. Hamoide hamshachas milmay lamata, which denotes the drawing down from above to below. To give birth, to have an offspring, which is a result of a feeling. When you intellectually expand your mind and you meditate on it and you delve deeply in it, the result will be a midah, a feeling. And through the comprehension, the meditation on the greatness of God, ava v'yira, love and awe, v'toldusan b'moichoi, and giving kind of birth intellectually, v'talumas liboi, and the recesses of the heart. Here he alludes to what he taught us in the first section of Tanya, chapter 16. V'achakach, and all of this, once there is the hisbonenus and these intellectual intellectual feelings, it leads to b'bchinas galos libay, to have an actual feeling of the heart. So here, these lines, the Alter Rebbe lays out the recipe for feelings, Hillel and Isser, and that is that you need to have strong hisbonenus, and to have strong hisbonenus, you need content, data. I always say, if you have no data and you have no content, or you have weak data and weak content, your hisbonenus ain't going anywhere. I mean, and this, I guess for a moment, this is the difference between Chabad hisbonenus and other systems of hisbonenus, those that even have that. Not many have it, but those that have it, let's say take Aryeh Kaplan's book, Jewish Meditation, which probably you're aware of or read. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan was a very strong kind of Chabadnik and Breslov, probably more Breslov than Chabad. And his system of meditation is much more Breslov than Chabad. What's the difference? The difference is the hisbonenus, is the meditation an emotional one, or is the meditation an intellectual one? The Chabad system, as we've been learning for years in Tanya, is an intellectual one. That's Chabad. In other words, to understand it, that's what I was saying to you, Hillel, before, to really, good question. Now work on understanding it, not feeling it. Don't deal with feelings. In the Chabad system, if you bring feelings into the intellect, you're distorting the meditation. And the result is whatever the result is, but it's not the systematic one leading to the other. So what's the first step? As the Alter Rebbe says here, the creative idea, the Chochmah, the development of the Chochmah, Bina, the hamokus hadas, delving deeply into it, concentrating in English das, concentrating on it. And when you are one with that idea, understanding it, not feeling it. Don't worry about feelings. In that world of understanding, you have to exclude feelings. You're not searching for feelings. You're searching for understanding. And once you understand properly, automatically it leads to some result in the sense of an emotion. You understand? It leads to some feeling of an emotion. So in the Chabad system, the seichel and midas, what do we call this? This ila va'olol, cause and effect. The olol, the effect, comes directly from the cause. Does the effect, the olol, need to create to be created? No. It's automatic. If you have a strong cause, you're going to have an effect. What is the cause in this scenario and in classical ila va'olol language in Chasidus Chabad? Seichel and midas. Exactly what we're learning here in Igeres haTeshuva. So this is the system. Now in Breslov, for example, the it's not that you don't have to understand what you're learning. Of course, understanding what you're learning is a basic one in any school of learning. But the hisbonenus, the meditation, is not in the intricacies of the idea. So what would be an example? Just as what you asked me. You asked the difference between godliness and God, because I said that's the difference, right? So in the Breslov model, you wouldn't creep into that world of what's the difference. Because the system of Breslov Hasidus doesn't lend itself, it doesn't require, and doesn't get into those, generally speaking, those details. It's not important in their model to have that clarity, that understanding. What is important is the emunah, the feeling, the surrender, those ideas. So for that, you don't need to know the difference between godliness and God. What you need to know is there's a God. That's all. And the hisbonenus, and again, Breslov really emphasizes hisbodedus, being alone and talking to God. That's an emotional style. Talk your heart out, cry your heart out, dance your heart out. And if you go, let's say, to Carlene Stolin, right? The screaming, the screaming coming from the very depth, very emotional. So I chose, let's say these three, Chabad, Breslov, and Carlene Stolin, because they're three different methods. Chabad is intellect, Breslov is kind of in between, and Carlene Stolin is very emotional. Okay? So three different systems. Yes, Hillel.
Would you consider Breslov, your understanding, sort of in the category of a Chagat Chasidus?
Absolutely.
What?
Absolutely. But I think when you ask a Breslov, a serious Breslov chassid, they'll tell you we are Keser. I've heard that, but between you and me, it doesn't add up intellectually. And I'm not gonna. It's just saying words is meaningless. A Keser is Ratzon. Ratzon is Ratzon is a makif. I'm not going to go into that right now, but yes, Hillel, generally speaking,
okay.
From the
certainly, I can understand very much the analogy to Carlin Stolin, and Stretton comes from that tradition. So so I think that's sort of it. Part of my blood makeup is in that kind of ancestry. But there is in my mind there's a strong intellectual dimension to Breslov, and primarily what I've learned in it is the Likutei Halachos, which is I think kind of it, which is a very head-based approach to. So anyway, I
right,
you know,
but again, Hillel, you've learned Tanya, Chasidus, Chabad, you learned Likutei Halachos. Are you telling me you don't see a difference in the approach?
Yeah, I definitely see a difference in the approach. I see them as very distinct, for sure.
Okay. So that's the answer. That's the answer. Now, to find your...
I'm just saying that I'm not sure Breslov in itself would consider itself Chagat. You know.
Right.
So,
and
I think Stratton would consider itself.
Right. And that's why I said to you, if you asked a serious Breslover, he's going to say we're Kesser. He's not going to say we're Chagat. You're right.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, everybody thinks they're number one. You know,
No. I'm not saying that. I didn't mean that. You know. I mean, I know that you meant it as a joke, but you know, sometimes they'll use it as a joke. But I mean that they feel that they'll agree that our system is not Chabad. I mean, like you said, it's so obvious. But they'll say that we touch something deeper, whatever, you know. But it's crystal clear from both Reb Nachman, Reb Nosson, and even today's Shalom Arush, and all the Svarim that are so popular and so gewaldig and made so many balchuvas and everything. And please continue, you know. But nevertheless, it's a very different system, and that, by the way, I would say is a reason that today probably Breslov, at least in the frum world, is making more Bali Tshuva than Chabad. You know, complete Bali Tshuva, full. You know, because it doesn't demand that rigorous intellectual understanding and delving into issues that we continuously delve into in Tanya. It just doesn't. You know, the Chabad.
I can understand.
And I'm not talking about the Chabad Breslov, outward movements. I'm not even talking about the Yechi or the Nanach. I'm not talking about that. Even serious Breslovers in the traditional, conventional way of Chabad and Breslov, it's more practically based. It's very different. But when you go back to the source, which we're learning here, the source, or Likutei Halachos, Likutei Maran, the source. You take a good look, and you'll see a difference, a very different approach. You know, Reb Nachman will quote a pasuk. Yeah. He will quote a pasuk, and then a short explanation. Then quote is different. Let's continue. I want to finish this chapter. Okay. And now
I'm going to be off camera.
Okay. Oh, no problem. Now he says. We're the 4 lines from the bottom of the end of the chapter. This, look at the Alter Rebbe's language here. This draws and brings the true avodah. Through speech, sound and speech, voice and speech. Oy Maisa, or leads to action. Hein Oisi is Vav K. Those are the 2 last letters of Hashem's name, Vav K. V'chuli, etc. V'gam ha'yizbonenus lohavenu lahaskil b'mitose v'gdulose yizborich. The meditation to understand and comprehend in God's truthfulness and greatness. Nimshach gam kein, it also comes me'ha-Torah, from the Torah. The Araisa Mechochma Nafkas, because Torah derives from God's wisdom. He Pchinas Yud. This is alluded. This is represented by the Yud. Shel Shem Hashem v'chulu, of the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. So what's the Alter Rebbe doing at the end? He throws in this. We're talking about the 4 letters of Hashem. That every person, Yoini, you have within yourself Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud is your Chochma, Vav is your Bina, Hey is your Bina, Vav your Midas. The last Hey is Malchus, deeper speech, which leads to emotions. At the end, Velvel, the Alter Rebbe throws in a very interesting piece. He says, V'gam, also, his bonus on the greatness and the truthfulness of God needs to come from Torah. And this is kind of alluding to when a person goes into his bonus mode, but it's based on self, you aren't going to get a healthy Yudke Vovke. So when I said earlier to Hillel to meditate on the difference between godliness and God, it needs to be rooted in Torah. Meaning to say, not to bring foreign philosophies and ideologies and ideas into our mind and from there extrapolate. No. That's not going to lead you to a true result, a healthy result, a result as described here. It has to be Torah based. And this is very important because many times we inject our own ideas that we're walking around with 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of our life, and we inject that as a prelude for our meditation. Says the Alter Rebbe, that won't work. That will not lead to an appropriate result, a midah, a healthy emotion. And this also touches the issue, which is to have healthy emotions, we need to have the Torah-based hisbandlus. Chevra, Mitzvah Shem, coming Monday, we will begin learning chapter Hey. I wanted to say that it's been a week of great Giluyim. Yesterday was also my grandfather's yahrzeit, who lived in Tel Aviv after he came from Romania. And then he moved over to Bnei Brak. He didn't come to my father's wedding because he was scared to go on a plane. And he used the line, Ashrei Yeshivas V'Secha. Fortunate is the one who sits home. But he was, I met him a few times in my life. He was a real Yid who was a Talmud Chacham and modest. He would go to learn Gemara 4 or 5 in the morning in the local shtibel in Bnei Brak, and he would put the Gemara in a brown bag. No one should see he's carrying a Gemara. And that's, he was still living with Europe, Romania, like they would say. He never landed. This was Zayda Shleima. So yesterday was his yahrzeit. Also was the yahrzeit of a very dear friend, Dr. Mark Rosen, Olav Sholem, who I met in Los Angeles. And he became a Baal Teshuva. I think he grew up in Binghamton, New York. And he was, we became very close and had many conversations. I remember Yoni on the top floor of the Yeshiva building in Los Angeles, Orochona Chabad. I had an office. I had a place here where I could do my research and study and prepare. And I remember one night we spent, I think, almost all night just talking. After I moved, I happened to move also to New York, and he came to our house, and he really had a magnanimous heart. He would go to Landau's on 18th Avenue. It's around the corner from my house, Friday late afternoon, and come back literally with a shopping cart of food. And I didn't ask him to do anything. It was really a real good neshama. Unfortunately, he passed on, at a young age, 49. And I had the schus of being on the plane. His body was transported to Eretz Yisrael, and he's buried on Har HaZeisim. And he wanted to always live in Eretz Yisrael, so he didn't end up living there, but he's buried there. So yesterday was his yahrzeit. Yesterday was also the yahrzeit of Rabbi Yitzchak Groner, who was the rabbi, the Chabad Rav in Melbourne, Australia. Originally, I think he was born in Eretz Yisrael. He came to New York early in his life, in the 20s. Powerhouse. I made a clip about him. You could and should listen to it because there's a lot of beautiful things about him and his life. And of course, it was the yahrzeit of Reb Mendel Futterfass, the famous Chabad Chassid, the Russian Chassid. Yesterday was his yahrzeit. So we've had a beautiful week of farbrengens. I shared some of the stories yesterday. Rabbi Benny Zippel of Utah farbrenged in Coral Springs, where I am now, and it was very special. And we go on. So with all of this, everyone should have a good week. I also did an interview with the photographer that took these beautiful pictures and put it out in a book called The Oracle, and there's some controversy about it. So if you care to follow up on that, you should have those clips too. And we continue going with strength. My grandson today is going to Mexico. The Chabad has a camp there. They're going out to Mexico. It's the camp from Yerushalayim, but because of all of the stuff in Eretz Yisrael now, they moved the camp to Mexico. So it's the summer, and let's utilize it. What does it say? Shemesh umogin. It's the heat of the sun. Bet shemesh. So it's a time to know that Hashem is shining on us, Yoni. Hashem is really shining on us. Let's take it in. Let's take it in, and prepare ourselves for the good days, because there's a lot of goodness coming, and better goodness. Well, for you too over there in Germany, in Cologne, where you told me the Rebbe Rashab, I think one Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur was there, so there's also holiness there too. So we have to, wherever we are, we have to always remember that's the kavana. Wherever we are, whatever time, that's where we're supposed to be. I'm supposed to be here now, you're supposed to be there now, and we go with that. Have a good Shabbos, and we'll see everyone next week. Take care. Bye-bye.